Morning, Ben. Morning, Dwight.
Morning, Chris. How are you?
Very well. How are you both?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good.
Hello there, good morning.
Morning. Morning, Julia.
Morning.
We will see who else joins us. Where are you joining us from, Julia? Same question to you, Dwight. So where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from sunny Spain this morning.
Oh, very nice. Very
Yep.
nice indeed.
And it is sunny as well. It hasn't been, but it is sunny now.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Is that because you live there, or you're on holiday and joining us specially?
No. I'm based in Spain.
Oh, very nice, excellent. No, hello. How are you?
I'm fine. About you?
Yes, very well, thank you. Very well. Hi,
All
Olivia.
good.
Hello, morning everyone.
How are you all doing? Right. Just wait for see who else joins us. Right. Others may or may not join. Who knows? We have an elite group here to talk about control room technologies. The really the angle that I'm bringing this from is really some of the conversations that I have when we're auditing control rooms. And very often we get comments around technology like, we've just got this new system, but it's not doing what we want it to do. It's not working for us. We bought the wrong thing, etc. And, we're a relatively mature, relatively small market in the control room space. And so it surprises me when well-known technology brands, I won't name them, are seen to not work. So thinking about why that happens and sort of asking awkward questions as I do during these audits. The thing that we've discovered is that technology is being brought in as a means of trying to improve operational maturity, but on its own. And that's really not something that technology can do. And I'll sort of explain that in a bit more detail. So what I want to cover today really is three things. Is really what is the problem? What are the gaps that we see in terms of technology investment? Then thinking about how do we assess our operational maturity before we go and purchase technologies or make those investments. And then lastly, thinking about the sorts of things that we might do to prepare for technology procurement within the control room space and to prepare for having better conversations with suppliers. Ultimately, what I'd like for you all is that you get the most out of the investment that you are making. Show of hands, electronic. Now, I can't see anybody on camera. That might be that you haven't got your cameras on, or in setting this up for some reason, I have I've disabled your cameras. So apologies if that's my fault. But who is actively looking at new technologies or has been through a recent technology procurement? Olivia, yeah, is that something, is that recent, or you're about to start, or you've just finished?
It's probably a bit of everything, and I apologise, I haven't got my camera on. Didn't
No,
want to
no,
miss
no.
the opportunity to join the call, but I'm having to listen in from the car before I jump on the train, so I'll need to
No
drop off at
problem.
9:30.
Thank you.
Yes, a bit of everything. We've just finished some. We're introducing more, and we're still in the progress. So at most stages, covering it all.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. So, well, so hopefully there'll be definitely be something here for you. So let's just think about the problem really that has emerged, as I said, when we've been doing these audits. Why do we introduce technology? Well, I think there's a few expectations that we have as control room leaders as to what technology is going to bring. And I think the first is improved performance. And you'll excuse, I like whiteboards, my handwriting's really bad, so the two probably aren't very compatible. But we want to improve performance, right? We want to have better decisions. We want to reduce risk. That's why we have control rooms, is there to manage and mitigate risk within the organization. And partly we feel that bringing on modern technology will help us do that. The second area that we tend to see is empowerment of operators. What do I mean by that? I mean operators that have the intelligence, the information, the data at their fingertips, presented in a way that allows them to make better decisions, so they're better informed as to what's happening. And then the last one that I'll highlight is around escalation, but I'll call it process really, because it's not always escalation. But we want faster, clearer process. We want to be guided. We want workflow. And often we think, actually, we'll bring in some technology to help us manage that. What we often get, though, that is the symptom of operational maturity, is that rather than improved performance, we get quite expensive complexity. Rather than operators that are empowered with the right information, we end up with overwhelmed operators. And rather than clear, fast escalation workflow, we get this sort of automated ambiguity. And these are symptoms of operations that haven't been thought through, that haven't been documented, or we don't quite understand what the processes and the workflows are in a way that we can describe to technology suppliers. And if we can't describe our operations, either because, let's say, we haven't documented them, or because really we haven't evolved them yet, then what we end up with is technology that doesn't fit our requirements because we haven't defined those well enough. The complexity comes from technology that really accentuates what you already have, right? So if we think about some layers, we've got our operations, our SOPs, the way that we do things. And if those aren't clear, what we're putting on top is technology that nowadays is quite complex. And as I said, it's a mature technology market in the control room industry. And all that's going to do is amplify the mess that sits underneath. If we haven't thought about how data is going to flow, how it's going to be presented, and we haven't tested that in real time, then we end up with operators that have multiple screens because we don't have data integration. We've got alerts coming left, right, and center. And essentially, we create this overwhelming environment for operators rather than something that's empowering that allows them to make decisions. And if we haven't thought about our workflows, then and we introduce technology that is about automating and making that faster, then all we're doing is accentuating the ambiguity that already exists. So there are some things that platforms, that technology really can't fix. That's a lack of strategy, is the first one. Do we understand what our control room is here to do? What the operational and strategic outcomes are that we want from this control room operation? Adding technology is not going to give you that at all. Leadership capability gaps. Technology can bring some automation and some workflow, but that's not going to compensate for operational leadership that hasn't been trained, hasn't been exercised, that doesn't understand what should be going on, that hasn't been given the tools to make decisions. And that's what we want out of a control room. We want decisions, we want coordination, we want leadership. Technology isn't going to bring you on its own, I'll caveat that, on its own, consistent workflow and consistent SOPs. Those need to exist before. Technology can help to govern those, to enforce them, but you need to think about what it is that you want governed and enforced. As an anecdote, I also work with technology companies to help them implement with their customers. And for a couple, I've been brought in because the customer is expecting the technology supplier to bring process and workflow rather than that being delivered to them for them to implement. And technology suppliers are there to provide technology. They're really good at it. You know, they think about the features and the functionality. They think about the user interface. What they can't do is tell you what your processes should be. You need to have thought about those really before you start procurement. We'll get into that a little bit more detail. The other bit that technology can't fix is cultural behavior. The environment within which your control room operates, your operators are working in, whether there is an environment of psychological safety, and I talked about this in previous webinar last month, whether we're in a culture of learning, whether we pay attention to alerts that are coming in and we're diligent in how we interact with those. A very, very frequent behavior that we see in audits, and during our audits, we'll sit in the control room and we'll just watch and observe what's going on, is alarms coming in and operators just clearing them without really doing any work. And when we ask, well, why is that? They say, that alarm always goes off. And so we just ignore it. No real thinking around, well, why does it always go off? Is there a fault with, the connections? Is there a fault with that particular access point? Is it just that the settings are wrong? But it always goes off, so we clear it without doing any due diligence, without even looking at the cameras to see if on this occasion, perhaps it hasn't gone off an error. So technology on its own isn't going to fix the culture. You have to have established that. What it will do, though, is amplify what you already have. So if we have poor culture, we end up amplifying poor culture. And the last bit is cognitive overload. Again, we're talking here about technology being brought in as the sort of savior of all these problems. it plays a part. We're going to see that in a minute. But on its own, it is not going to solve cognitive overload. If we have poorly designed how we want data to flow. So we need to think about, before we start procuring, before we start talking to suppliers, we need to think about how we want data to come into the control room, what we want it to happen with that data once it's arrived, how it should be presented to operators to reduce cognitive overload so that they can make better decisions. So we empower them to do their job. So now let's think about, if we want to do it well, what do we need to have within our operations before we engage suppliers, before we embark on a procurement exercise? So what does operational maturity look like? And in the work that we do, we use this framework, these 7 pillars that we think underpin in a holistic way control room capability. And we use this model for everything. It underpins our audits, it underpins the operating model work we do. When we then go on to design control rooms, we're designing all of these aspects of the control room. And we start with strategy. It's really the underpinning pillar, the foundation. Maybe I should redraw this model, but it's the starting point, because once you understand that, the decisions you have to make in the other pillars become a lot easier. The key to this framework is really that weakness in one area affects the whole of your operations, the whole of your capability. But one pillar on its own cannot compensate for the others. So here we're talking about technology. Technology on its own cannot compensate for weaknesses in the other pillars. So one of the things that you can do using this model is really to test your maturity with the lens of, we're going to be implementing technology. How do we best do that? Are we ready? Are we ready to implement technology for our control room capability? So let's start with strategy. So in strategy, what are we thinking? We're thinking, really, why is this control room here? What is it delivering? What are the strategic and operational outcomes that we are after? And I will come back to outcomes quite a lot in this conversation about technology, because that is how we need to be interacting with suppliers. Right, there is no point going to supply and saying, I'd like a system that does this thing with a green button. When I press it, that green button does this, and a red button that does that. Suppliers will say, well, yes, I can design that for you, but might have to customize the color of the buttons, or etc. etc. Much better to have a clear conversation about outcomes, to say, here is our control room strategy, here is what we have written down and agreed within the organization that this control room capability is here to deliver. Here are the services that it delivers, here are the services that it doesn't deliver. These are the things that we don't do in this control room, and here are the outcomes that we expect, that when our control room is working at full capability, it is delivering these things for the organization. Those outcomes at a strategic and operational level are things that suppliers can work with. They can translate those into, our platform can deliver those outcomes in this way, rather than you dictating how the platform should operate to the finite detail. You end up really with a mismatch at that point between a platform that means you can press a green button, but ultimately doesn't meet the outcome that you want. So much better that we start with outcomes and allow the supplier to work backwards to say, okay, if you want that outcome, here's how we can deliver it for you. But that strategy needs to be written down. It needs to be implicit. I've spoken before about a strategy that is almost by accident that emerges that hasn't really been thought about, because over the years we add things to our control rooms without really thinking. Very easy to do. It's a 24/7 capability, generally, often the only 24/7 place within an organization. Very easy to just lump things into it without really thinking about how it detracts from what we really want it to do. So is strategy implicit? Is it written down? Is it agreed within the organization? And have we defined the strategic, the operational outcomes that we want? Then let's think about people. We want technology that's going to reduce cognitive load, help tackle fatigue, that's going to empower people to do their job better, to make better decisions, to coordinate in a more efficient way. But have we recruited people to do that? Or have we recruited for our current immature operation that perhaps is more about monitoring when actually we want them to be proactive, where perhaps it's a very manual process when actually we want them to be a bit more sophisticated in how they interact with data and technology. So are our people ready to bring on new technology and to work in a different way? Technology means us working less manually, more automated, working in sync with technology, especially as we start to think about AI and the impact of AI on operations. So have we got the right people sat at consoles, sat in the chair, ready to interact? And the other element is to think about, if we don't think we've got those people, how do we develop them so that they are ready for the technology when it arrives? Often we get very excited about features and, this technology can do this and that, and those features and bits of functionality are really important. But what makes successful technology, or what makes technology delivery successful, in large part, it's business change. It's how we bring people along on the journey to say, here is a different way of working, here is a different tool, we're going to do things differently, be part of that change, we're going to help you come along with it. Poor business change will lead to poor adoption. Poor adoption means you've wasted your investment. So people work within a culture. And we want to foster a culture in control rooms that is about learning, that is psychologically safe, that is about early detection. One of the areas that we've got sort of going around this model is resilience, and culture is a massive part of creating resilient organizations. I think when we talk about physical security, probably most of you are aware of the sort of human factor that comes within that. So yes, you can have great, door access, but if I come along to your access point holding 2 coffees with a lanyard around my leg and say, oh, could you just hold the door open? Will somebody hold the door open and let me in? When in fact I don't have access to that particular area. So the culture that exists in the control room is just as important as the technology, the processes, the people that are there. Is our culture ready for technology? Have we established psychological safety so that if something in the technology is not working, we're confident people will raise their hand and say, something's not right here, let's have a look? Or will they simply go along with it and just trust because the computer said yes or the computer said no, that we're just going to trundle along? Do we have a culture where those alerts and alarms aren't simply silenced because they always go off? Because in that case, have whatever technology you like, but your control room isn't going to be delivering the safety and security that it's there to deliver. We're working often within environments. I mean, the number of control rooms I go to that are stuck in basements with no windows. Please, if you can, don't put your control room in a basement. Natural light is good for you, and it's good for your people. But we're working within physical environments that need to be thought about and designed. So bringing in technology is part of that environmental design. So we need to think about the way that we want information presented, so that, and this links back, everything here is connected, right? This links back to people, it links back to cognitive load, it links back to fatigue. How are we presenting information to operators? Do we have, as very often we see, a fire alarm panel on a wall over here that's got some lights going off? We've got a computer for CCTV, a different computer for access control. Over in the corner, there's some legacy system that we can't quite get rid of because nobody knows what it does. And we're running between the two. And in order for me to have full situational awareness, I need to piece together in my head information from all of these systems in a very mentally intensive way. So before we start to engage on let's bring new technology in, we need to assure ourselves that we're not simply going to add to that mess. Have we thought about, in a way that is documented, that we can describe to the market? Have we thought about how we want information presented? What does it need to interface with and interact with? How do we integrate data so that we're presenting single pane of glass, perhaps, to operators in a way that allows them to make better decisions? Of course, all of that underpinned by operations. So what are your workflows? How are you going to work? Where does a particular incident start? What's the life cycle of that incident? Where do we expect operators to intervene and to make decisions? Where are the escalation points? At what point does an operator stop having the authority to make a particular decision and it needs to go to somebody more senior in the chain? Is that person more senior in the chain, trained, exercised? Do they understand their role? And do they understand, or do we understand in the design, how their role might change if we bring in new technology? All of that needs to be understood and written down and tested before we bring on technology. And I would say before we engage suppliers, because they're going to ask these questions. They're going to say, you're bringing in an incident management tool. How do you want this configured? Where are the escalation points so that we can alert an operator through the system that these conditions have been met, therefore you need to escalate? Or what is the workflow for a lift entrapment, for a fire alarm, for a suspect item? How can we support the operator to manage that workflow by giving them reminders? But you, client, need to give us that information so that we can configure. I'm going to skip technology because we'll come back to that. That's what we're talking about. But very linked to technology is data, right? So data comes back to, say, everything's linked. We talked about environment and how data is presented. But do we think about how we want data to add to our situational awareness, right? Have we thought about what does situational awareness mean in our context? And every control room works in a slightly different context. Where is the data coming from? What does the aggregate of that data mean, so that we can describe to whatever technology supplier we're bringing in, and this applies across the board, whether it's access control, CCTV, alarms, life safety equipment, incident management tools. This applies equally, right? Can we describe how the data coming from those technologies is going to add to an aggregate to give that situational awareness to our operators, to our capability? If we can't, what's going to happen is they're not going to know how to configure their platforms to best enable what you want it to deliver. And so down the line, what happened, back to the point I was making at the beginning, we end up with comments like, oh, we invested so much in this system, but it's not working. Well, it probably would work if actually you describe what you wanted in the right way. So finally, technology really, I mean, it's everything we're talking about here, but what do we want technology to do? We want it to help manage risk. We want it to help make better decisions. We want probably some automation to take away, manual tasks. That's about making things faster, more accurate, perhaps. So if we want those things, let's describe those things. What does that mean for you? So as we talk about bringing on technology, you will have your own procurement processes, and in those procurement processes, I hazard a guess that there will be a need to write requirements. Okay, and I come back to, if we want this, we need to describe them as outcomes. No point saying, yeah, I want this page that looks exactly like the paper version of the form that I already have. Right? We're simply just digitizing forms. That's not going to bring you any benefit. But if we talk about the outcome and say, you know, I need to find technology that must be able to deliver incident information to operators in order for them to make better decisions. Okay, we can break that down. That's probably not an accurate enough outcome, but we break that down to describe the outcome. And technology suppliers can come backwards and say, okay, our system can do this in this way for you. Part of your evaluation of technology, come on to that next, but part of your evaluation of technology is going to be, does this technology deliver our outcomes in a way that meets our culture, that meets the strategy that we want, that fits within our environment, that aligns with the way that our processes and operations work? So running through this model first really allows you to see, A, are there any gaps? B, can we describe all of these elements in a way that is helpful for the procurement? Can we describe the outcomes that we want, you know, not just on day one of implementation, but in 12 months' time, right? Can we describe what this technology will have changed for us in order to meet the outcomes you know, in the next 12-month period? Very likely, you're all going to have to do some sort of business case to buy new technology, whether that goes to an exec team, a board, a governance a committee. What are they going to be asking? They're going to be saying, okay, well, why are we making this investment? Can you assure us that if we make this investment, we're going to get the benefits that we want at the end? And if you can show them that you've been through this model, that you've assessed the readiness of your operations to bring new technology in, they're going to be much more assured and much more likely to approve that business case. If you can show them that you've described the outcomes that you want, both strategically and operationally, in the short, medium, and long term from this investment, they're more likely to approve the business case. Because over the short, medium, long term, you've got something to come back to that says, has this investment worked? Have we got the benefits out of making this investment that we wanted? And if we haven't, what do we need to tweak to get those benefits? Very often when I look at technology implementations and look at project plans, they stop a few, you know, if maybe a few weeks after go live. So we've had go live, we've had a bit of hypercare, and then the supplier, obviously, or the integrator, whoever's implementing, has gone away, and then our project stops. And 6 months down the line, we say, yeah, but this isn't working for us. Of course it's not, because you've stopped the project that should be mapping and tracking benefits. Have we, you know, at each stage, have we gone through and said, okay, at the end of month one, which benefits have been realized that we said would be in the business case? And if they haven't, what do we tweak? What do we do? Oh, is the configuration right in order for us to be back on track to get those benefits by the 12-month period or whatever your business case has said? So this tool, hopefully, a helpful framework for you to really give yourselves some assurance that you're ready, to help you describe what it is that you want from technology in a way that suppliers can engage with and respond to you in a more accurate way. And that's both from a functionality point of view, but also from a price point of view, and some assurance for whatever governance that you have in place, governance committees, boards, that you have thought about this, that you're more likely to be successful in your technology implementation. I haven't mentioned cost really in any of this, but there is a cost to getting it wrong, right? There is a cost to buying the wrong technology because it's not going to do what you want it to do. There is a cost to not implementing accurately because you're delaying benefits. And often you then need to bring suppliers back in to reconfigure and rework. So there is a cost element to not doing the upfront work before you engage suppliers, before you embark on procurement. So how do we avoid all of this? Once you've done the readiness bit, once you've looked at your operational maturity and thought, yeah, we're ready. How can you prepare yourself to engage with the market? And excuse me if it is repetitive. I'm going to talk about outcomes again. So strategic and operational outcomes. What is the specific problem that we are trying to solve with this technology? So we started with our control room strategy, our strategic requirement for this control room capability, which is our governing document as we go through the rest of the framework, as we design our control room function, and it should be the guiding light every time, as a sideline, right? Why is it important to have it documented and agreed? As I said before, 24/7 operations often get lumbered with stuff that we don't know where to put anywhere else in an organization, right? You need to have somebody looking after keys and giving the cleaners access. We'll put it in the control room because, that's the easiest place to put it. It's 24/7. Lost property, we don't know where to do that. We're going to put it in the control room. This, that, and the other, right? The more you put it in that is not related to the outcomes that you want that control room to deliver, the more it detracts. But if you have it written down and agreed, every time somebody comes and says, oh, could you just, you can say no, because that doesn't fit with our strategic requirement for this capability that was agreed at board level or whatever level you need to agree on. So we've got that, but now let's think about the technology itself. Why are we procuring new technology? What is it that we want it to do? What is the problem it's solving? How does that look in 12 months' time? So can we describe what will be different in 12 months after implementation? And importantly, how do we measure those outcomes so that we can report back the benefits within the business case? Are they measurable? How can we, not just anecdotally, and that is important because actually we don't often, or certainly we don't often enough, ask operators, what did you think? Did it make your life better or worse? A quick pulse survey to say, how's this implementation been for you? Has this technology delivered what you expected it to deliver as an operator? But still important, we need to have measurable outcomes. What are the benefits that are going to come out of this? Can we describe our current technology environment? It is very likely that suppliers will say, what do you have now? I'm going to put my technology in, but what's surrounding it? What is it interacting with? What systems are there already? What's being retained and what's being replaced? What are the integration requirements? What does my platform need to talk to, or what other systems does my platform need to talk to? And where are the genuine capability gaps? The comment that I mentioned at the beginning, I think, in the last section, that but this technology it really isn't working for us. That comment often reveals a capability gap that is more about configuration than it is about needing new technology. And I always advocate make the most of the investment that you've got, right? So when we audit and people say this isn't working, my first response isn't get rid of it, buy something better. The first thing you should do is explore the technologies you've got already. Sweat the assets. Have you kept up to date with the latest versions? Because a new version might have new features that you could use that will plug the capability gap that you've identified? Was the configuration done right in the first place? Have your operations evolved, but you haven't evolved the configuration of that particular tool? So what are the genuine capability gaps? Not the ones that will be closed by configuration, but the ones that just do not exist in the technologies you've already got, because that is part of your business case. But if I'm on the board, if I'm an exec director, if I'm managing director, I'm not going to approve investment if you haven't got the most out of the technology you already have. There might be genuine gaps. I'm not saying there aren't. There might be genuine gaps there. But first, you need to show that you've done what you can with the technology you've got, because technology investment is an expense. It's expensive. It's capital that we could be putting somewhere else. So we need to be confident that it's there to do a particular job. If we map our current environment and understand the systems that we've got there, if we look at the integration capability, if we look at where we think capability gaps are, and then dig a bit deeper, then often we'll find maybe some configuration here is what we should start with first. And the third bit is governance. And I'll add into that assurance. So do we know our governance processes? Have we understood who's in charge of the project, who's responsible for the project to deliver this, versus who's responsible for the technology when it goes operational? Have we thought about how we're going to make decisions during an implementation program or project? Are people empowered to make decisions, or do we need to decide by committee? One of the sort of governance layers that I often recommend is having some sort of design authority. A small committee, and not talking, we don't want 20, 30, 40 people, but a small committee that is empowered to make design decisions on behalf of the organization. This is below a project board or program board that reports into them, but that standalone on their own is able to make design decisions. It's able to say, yes, we're going to configure these options in this way. That's signed off. We can have a user interface that looks like this. That's signed off. And the people on that design authority, their job is to go back to their constituents and have conversations and come back with the response of those constituents, and then amongst them to discuss and to agree. Right? So have you got the governance in place that is going to really help you be more successful in your implementation? And then how do we manage conflict between stakeholders? There will be lots of stakeholders here. You know, one client we're working with, whilst we've been focusing on the control room and thinking about control room design and technologies and control room, actually other departments have caught on and thought, this evolution of the control room is really helpful for my operations in these other departments. How do I get a piece of that? How do I influence? So other stakeholders likely to be very interested in what you're doing, and some of them there will be a direct impact, so you will want to bring them on board. So a control room is often part of the security function or estates department. You know, there are other functions within security. There are other functions within estates. So let's look at the interaction and the impact of this new technology being brought on the other stakeholders as well. And then, is there executive sponsorship for this, right? We all know projects are much more successful when there's somebody at the top about it, who can unblock, who can help move things forward when we need them, who can inspire, and who can make decisions when they're escalated to them in order to get the project moving. So these are things that suppliers will want to know. Are these in place? Have you thought them through? And it gives the market reassurance that you are organised, and that if they are going to bid and give you a quote for your implementation, that it's more likely to be successful, right? Technology suppliers want successful implementations because they want to be able to bring other potential customers and say, look what we did over here. Look at this wonderful job. right? You become their reference site. So if you have implemented well, which is what they want as well as what you want, right? We're together is going to be likely to be more successful. A couple of other things about evaluation of suppliers, and then we'll go into questions. The right supplier will ask you about your operations, right? Because they want to know how their technology can support your operations, right? The right supplier is likely to talk about outcomes. What do you want the outcome to be once you've implemented this technology? Versus a supplier that talks about functionality, features. And so I would say, think about the type of interaction you're having with a supplier as part of your evaluation. Are they interested in the operations and understanding the context that their technology is coming into? Are they asking about the outcome rather than saying, a whole conversation and a whole discussion about the things that their technology can provide, the features and the functionality and the buttons that you can press? That is important. That will come as part of a structured tendering process, right, and a structured evaluation. But those initial discussions should not be about technology. They should be about the supplier understanding your context. And then, can they provide evidence that they have done something similar before? And I'm going to caveat this because technology is moving at quite a pace. And we have startups that have really interesting technologies that you might want to bring on board. So this isn't to say we discount people that have never worked in a controlled environment. But if they haven't, that brings extra risk to delivery, right? Control room environments can be complex. They don't have to be, but they can be complex. And so we want some assurance that they have successfully delivered their technologies in control room environments before, or in environments that are similar, right? Control rooms are very niche, but they may have deployed their technologies in environments that are similar to control rooms in terms of size, in terms of complexity. And also thinking about your wider organization. Have they delivered into organizations that are similar to your organization? If they haven't, then we might want to do a bit more due diligence. We might want to find out where they have delivered, even if they're a bit smaller, even if it's not exactly a control room, and dig a bit deeper into those references. Go and visit the sites, go and visit those reference clients, go and talk to them to see what their experience was working with this particular supplier. And then build a program. If that technology is really the one that is going to solve that problem, don't discount it, but build things into your project delivery that are going to help mitigate. So provide control room expertise. You are the experts on your operation. Make sure that within that project team, you have operational delivery expertise that can guide the supplier. And build that into the commercials as well, right? So more checkpoints, more governance points where we're going to say, okay, are we on track? Are we delivering? Is this right? Think with your commercial department, your procurement department, at what point can we parachute out if this isn't working, right? So find the evidence, but if it's not there, that shouldn't stop you if the technology is right, because as I say, we are evolving really, really quickly in this particular area. So I'm going to stop talking now. You'll be pleased to know. And really open the floor in the next, we're going to run over slightly. Hopefully that's okay. But really open the floor to some questions if there are any.
Chris, I've
Yes.
got a question. Thanks for the presentation. It was a very informative. If obviously quite a lot of these discussions were about before going ahead with procurement of technology, if you're already in a position where, and often for perhaps even up to control room managers, people that are in charge of control rooms in larger organizations, those sort of decisions might be out of their hand. Sometimes they might not be. They're sort of just given a system and said, there you go, get on with it. So there might be systems that aren't actually currently working in the control room, and it's stuff that you've kind of already been lumbered with. Have you, like, your process that you've got, the 7 pillars and looking at that, it seems like it can equally be done if you've already got something in place and it's about resetting and going back to the beginning and actually looking at, like, forgetting about the problems you got with the technology for the time being, and then sort of going back and perhaps starting that process again. Have you had other organizations that have got the same problem that you've worked with, where you've been able to say, okay, you've got these problems with the technology that's already been procured, you've already got it, now can we go back? And is that something that you can help with, and that your model can equally be applied to?
So short answer, yes. I'll just wind back, right? So if you've got technology and nobody in the control room has been involved in selecting that technology, fire your CTO, right? That's just really, really poor technology procurement, right? You cannot. Control rooms are very particular places, right? That work in a particular way, and that's no different to any other department, right? Departments have particular cultures, particular role, right? So to have IT or technology or whatever the department is called, selecting technology in isolation is just very poor practice. Right? But if we get over that and think about, right, we are in this situation, what can we do? So I go back to the point I made a bit earlier, that we want to sweat the assets, right? We've made this investment, so we should do as much as we can to make that investment work. But often it takes time to figure out that technology isn't working, right? So I don't know the circumstances that you're particularly describing, or whether it's a theoretical question. But let's assume that technology has been there been in for a while, and now we're figuring out actually it doesn't do what we want it to do, and it's not working. Go back to the beginning, right? So that technology is going to stay where it is. We can take a bit of time to think. So use the 7 pillar model, go around it again. Okay. First of all, thinking about strategy. Have we got one? Do we know what the control room said to do? What are the outcomes? And you work your way around and do that, to satisfy yourself that operationally you're mature, right? And that's the audits that we do, is about operational maturity. But secondly, to document these things. And once it's documented, what are you going to do? You're going to cross-check it against the technology that's there already, right? So look at the configuration of that particular technology and say, right, is it configured in a way that meets the operational need? Now, you might need to bring somebody in to do that, right? Depending on the technology and depending on your internal capability, whether you have sort of systems managers, technical managers, dedicated to the control room. So depending on your capability, you might want to bring in the supplier, you might want to bring in the integrator that put it in. But doing that cross-check means that you can say, okay, well, is there genuinely a capability gap, i.e. this technology just cannot deliver what we want it to deliver? Or is it about configuration, because it was put in, it wasn't configured right in the first place, we didn't do the business change that came with it, because it might be a training issue, etc., etc. So yeah, absolutely. That model is one of the things that I like about it. Deploy that model at any time you like, right? Because it's just a framework to help with thinking and to help think in a very holistic way, around your control room capability. So you can use that model, almost in whatever context that you want. So now bringing in the supplier, I think, is a really helpful thing to do. And what we've done with clients that have been in similar situations, right, where we said, we've got technology, we don't want to spend a whole load of money on new technology because we think it can do what we want it to do. So, okay, let's bring the supplier. Okay, often, certainly in this industry, we have integrators that are implementing, but bring in the people that have built this system, right? Let's sit around a table and let's say, look, we want it to work, you want it to work. Let's have a discussion, guide us. What haven't we done? Are there features that we don't know about because the integrator didn't tell us, that we are missing, or are we not on the latest version, etc., etc. So talk directly to the supplier if you can, and you'll find often that they want to. Okay, they might not be the ones that then go and do the work because that's not necessarily their model, but they're the ones who know their system best. So coming in for a conversation, they don't want to lose you as a client, so they will do what they can to make sure that it works for you. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Any other questions? Where we're slightly over time, but happy to stay on if there are any more questions. Okay, well, look, thank you very much. What I will do is later on today, I'll send you out an email. I'll include the framework because that's a useful framework in lots of different contexts. I'll send you a bit more on that. The recording for the session, share it with colleagues, listen again. And we've put together a guide to making more confident technology choices. It really covers what I've been talking about today, just in a little bit more detail, but you've got it there just to refer to. And obviously, if you've got a particular circumstance that you think I can help with, do reach out and let me know. But until then, look, have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks.